Australia, Mexico, Vietnam, South Korea, Ukraine, Mexico, Israel, Australia, India, Japan, India, Turkey, Israel, Germany, Japan, Turkey, Israel, Turkey, 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 Canada, Argentina, Germany, Turkey, South Korea, South Korea, Israel, South Korea, South Korea, United Kingdom, South Korea, Turkey, South Korea, Brazil, South Korea, Turkey, South Korea, Australia, Turkey, United Kingdom, South Korea, Canada, South Korea, Philippines, South Korea, Argentina, South Korea, Canada, South Korea, India, Turkey, 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 South Korea, Germany, Turkey, Philippines, South Korea, Turkey, Indonesia, South Korea, Turkey, Indonesia, South Korea, India, France, South Korea, India, Turkey, Russia, Turkey, Germany, Turkey, Germany, Turkey, Russia, Turkey, Mexico, Japan, Turkey, 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 Russia, Turkey, Germany, Turkey, Germany, Turkey, Spain, Canada, Canada, Brazil, Israel, Turkey, Australia, Turkey, Ukraine, Turkey, Canada, Turkey, Germany, Israel, Australia, Turkey, America, Canada, South Korea, Turkey, Turkey, America, Turkey, Israel, Turkey, Israel, Turkey, India, Turkey, Philippines, Vietnam, Spain, Brazil, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, India, Turkey, Turkey, Mexico, Spain, Indonesia, Vietnam, United Kingdom, Canada, Mexico, America, Canada, Mexico, Mexico, Canada, Australia, Mexico, Argentina, Russia, Ukraine, Germany, Palestine, Canada, Ukraine, Ukraine, United Kingdom, France, Israel, Germany, Brazil, Indonesia, America, India, Argentina, Australia, United Kingdom, Germany, Russia, India, Russia, Mexico, Ukraine, India, Vietnam, India, France, India, 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 Australia, Australia, Turkey, Brazil. Philippines. Japan. Philippines. Spain. France. Brazil. Brazil. Spain. Russia. Philippines. Germany. Australia. Indonesia. Brazil. Philippines. Palestine. America. Vietnam. France. Indonesia. Turkey. United Kingdom. Australia. Mexico. United Kingdom. Spain. Palestine. Spain. Argentina. Australia. Israel. Vietnam. United Kingdom. Ukraine. India. Brazil. Japan. Germany. Palestine. Vietnam. Palestine. Canada. Turkey. France. Turkey. Palestine. Canada. Japan. France. Brazil. Brazil. Israel. Palestine. Argentina. South Korea. Israel. South Korea. Palestine. South Korea. Ukraine, South Korea, Australia, India, Spain, Japan, France, Philippines, Russia, France, Australia, Palestine, America, Russia, United Kingdom, Vietnam, Philippines, Argentina, Indonesia, Brazil, France, Spain, Indonesia, India, Brazil, Spain, Argentina, France, Ukraine, Palestine, India, Australia, Australia, Japan, Germany, Spain, Japan, Canada, Turkey, Vietnam, India, Brazil, South Korea, United Kingdom, Spain, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Philippines, Japan, Canada, Germany, Turkey, Palestine, Germany, Philippines, Israel, Australia, Philippines, France, France, Philippines, Indonesia, Russia, Turkey, Australia, Israel, America, Turkey, Spain, Turkey, Turkey, Russia, Turkey, Philippines, Turkey, Indonesia, Canada, Palestine, South Korea, Turkey, Palestine, France, Turkey, South Korea, Turkey, Spain, Russia, Turkey, Brazil, Germany, Turkey, Turkey, Mexico, France, Brazil, America, Turkey, Canada, Germany, United Kingdom, Vietnam, Vietnam, Turkey, Japan, Brazil, Israel, Germany, Canada, Philippines, Russia, Argentina, Argentina, Brazil, America, United Kingdom, Russia, France, Palestine, France, South Korea, Israel, Germany, Japan, United Kingdom, India, Spain, Germany, France, Ukraine, France, Brazil, Australia, Spain, America, Australia, South Korea, Spain, Germany, Australia, Israel, Palestine, Israel, Philippines, Turkey, Ukraine, Turkey, Indonesia, Australia, Argentina, Germany, Russia, France, United Kingdom, Vietnam, South Korea, Turkey, Australia, Turkey, America, Turkey, Brazil, South Korea, Turkey, Germany, Turkey, Japan, Palestine, Germany, Palestine, Germany, Palestine, Argentina, Palestine, Australia, United Kingdom, Mexico, France, India, France, Turkey, Argentina, America, Turkey, Turkey, Ukraine, Brazil, Japan, France, South Korea, Ukraine, Japan, Germany, Brazil, Palestine, Australia, Japan, Germany, Philippines, Ukraine. Ukraine. India. Indonesia. Canada. Vietnam. Palestine. Spain. Turkey. Germany. Palestine. Australia. India. Spain. Brazil. Ukraine. Israel. Canada. India. Canada. Indonesia. Japan. Philippines. Mexico. America. Russia. Russia. Germany. America. South Korea. Spain. America. Mexico. Russia. Germany. America. France. Turkey. Ukraine. Brazil. Mexico. India. Argentina. Indonesia. Argentina. Russia. Spain. South Korea. Israel. Australia. Spain. Ukraine. America. Germany. Russia. France. Ukraine. Mexico. Brazil. Japan. Philippines. America. Japan. France. Turkey, Spain, Vietnam, Mexico, India, Turkey, Australia, United Kingdom, Brazil, Mexico, Mexico, America, America, France, Ukraine, Mexico, Palestine, Australia, Australia, Mexico, Palestine, America, Vietnam, United Kingdom, America, France, America, Mexico, America, Vietnam, America, America, France, Canada, Mexico, 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 America, Mexico, America, United America, 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 Japan, Indonesia, Russia, France, United Kingdom, Canada, Indonesia, France, Indonesia, France, Indonesia, Russia, Argentina, Indonesia, France, Indonesia, Vietnam, Japan, Indonesia, Israel, Russia, Philippines, Japan, Indonesia, Russia, Japan, France, Indonesia, Indonesia, Japan, France, Indonesia, Russia, Japan, Mexico, Russia, Japan, Indonesia, Russia, Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, Indonesia, Russia, Indonesia, Japan, Russia, Spain, Japan, Russia, Brazil, Japan, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Russia, Indonesia, France, Russia, Philippines, Russia, Indonesia, Russia, Germany, Russia, Japan, Russia, Indonesia, Japan, Russia, Indonesia, Japan, France, United Kingdom, Ukraine, Russia, Indonesia, Russia, Japan, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Australia, America, France, America, Brazil, Indonesia, Japan, France, Japan, America, France, Germany, Japan, India, Israel, France, America, Indonesia, Indonesia, Japan, America, Japan, India, France, Indonesia, Canada, France, America. In France, Brazil, Japan, France, Brazil, Indonesia, Turkey, Japan, France, Indonesia, France, Ukraine, in France, Spain, Japan, Spain, France, Brazil, France, Philippines, Indonesia, France, France, Spain, Indonesia, France, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Brazil, France, Japan, Brazil, France, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Indonesia, in Japan, in Australia, France, Indonesia, France, Indonesia, Japan, Japan, Ukraine, Japan, France, Indonesia, Japan, France, Indonesia, Japan, 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 America, Japan, Indonesia, Indonesia, France, Indonesia, France, France, Brazil, France, Japan, America, France, America, Indonesia, France, Brazil, Brazil, France, in Brazil, Brazil, France, Indonesia, Indonesia, America, Indonesia, Brazil, Spain, America, in Brazil, France, France, Japan, America, Japan, in Brazil, France, France, Brazil, France, Japan, France, Brazil, Japan, France, Brazil, in America, Japan, in France, Brazil, Brazil, Japan, Indonesia, Indonesia, South Brazil, France, Russia, Indonesia, France, Japan, India, Indonesia, France, Indonesia, Turkey, Ukraine, Indonesia, Brazil, Australia, Brazil, France, Japan, Germany, in Japan, France, in Japan, Ukraine, France, India, Japan, France, France, Japan, France, India, France, Japan, 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 Turkey, India, Japan, Germany, Indonesia, India, France, France, India, Russia, Ukraine, Japan, 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 Indonesia, in Japan, India, Japan, America, Turkey, Ukraine, France, Canada, Ukraine, Japan, America, Spain, Russia, Japan, in South Korea, Japan, America, France, Japan, Spain, France, America, India, Japan, Japan, France, India, Japan, Ukraine, India, Japan, India, Japan, Japan, India, Japan, Japan, America, Brazil, Japan, Japan, Spain, America, Ukraine, Japan, Ukraine, Ukraine, Japan, Turkey, South Korea, France, Japan, Ukraine, India, Japan, Japan, Ukraine, India, America, Indonesia, Ukraine, France, Turkey, Japan, America, Ukraine, Palestine, Ukraine, America, Ukraine, Japan, in Japan, India, Japan, Japan, Ukraine, America, America, Ukraine, America, India, Russia, Ukraine, Indonesia, America, India, Brazil, Japan, India, America, India, Japan, India, Japan, Ukraine, India, Japan, India, Ukraine, Ukraine, Japan, 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 India, South Korea, Japan, Japan, America, America, Ukraine, Japan, Turkey, Ukraine, Japan, India, Ukraine, Japan, Ukraine, Japan, Japan, India, Japan, Japan, Ukraine, India, Japan, 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 India, 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 Ukraine, India, America, Russia, Ukraine, Japan, Germany, America, India, Japan, India, Spain, Japan, South Korea, Ukraine, Japan, India, Japan, Japan, Ukraine, Germany, India, South India, Japan, India, Ukraine, South Korea, India, Ukraine, Russia, America, Canada, Ukraine, Ukraine, Japan, Ukraine, South Korea, Japan, 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 South Korea, Spain, Japan, Japan, South America, Japan, Spain, America, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, Japan, America, Japan, America, South Korea, Japan, Ukraine, Japan, Germany, Ukraine, Ukraine, Japan, Ukraine, Ukraine, America, Germany, Ukraine, Ukraine, America, Ukraine, Ukraine, South America, Japan, Germany, Canada, South Germany, Ukraine, Japan, Ukraine, Japan, Japan, Indonesia, France, Germany, Ukraine, South Korea, Mexico, Ukraine, Japan, Ukraine, Germany, United Kingdom, Germany, South Korea, Vietnam, Germany, America, Japan, Spain, South America, Ukraine, Japan, United America, Germany, Argentina, Ukraine, Ukraine, Japan, United Kingdom, Ukraine, America, Ukraine, Ukraine, Germany, Japan, Ukraine, India, Ukraine, Japan, Germany, Ukraine, Brazil, Japan, Ukraine, 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 India, America, United Kingdom, Ukraine, Germany, Ukraine, Canada, Germany, Japan, Germany, Ukraine, Germany, America, France, South Korea, Indonesia, Germany, Japan, Japan, Germany, America, Japan, Brazil, Ukraine, Indonesia, Japan, Brazil, Indonesia, Japan, Canada, America, Canada, Japan, America, Japan, Ukraine, Japan, Ukraine, Germany, Canada, Japan, Brazil, Indonesia, Germany, Indonesia, Spain, Japan, Canada, Ukraine, Japan, Indonesia, France, India, Japan, India, Israel, India, South Canada, Indonesia, Indonesia, Japan, Canada, Indonesia, Indonesia, Spain, Japan, Spain, India, Japan, Spain, Japan, India, Canada, Japan, Indonesia, America, India, Russia, Japan, Japan, Spain, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Indonesia, Brazil, Turkey, Vietnam, Japan, Spain, India, Turkey, Japan, Spain, Canada, America, Japan, Japan, India, Canada, Spain, Vietnam, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Vietnam, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, America, Indonesia, India, Indonesia, America, Vietnam, Japan, Japan, India, Indonesia, Japan, Japan, Germany, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, Brazil, India, America, Russia, India, Indonesia, America, Vietnam, Japan, India, Mexico, America, Indonesia, Japan, India, Japan, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, America, Canada, Japan, India, Japan, Indonesia, Indonesia, America, India, Canada, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Germany, America, Indonesia, India, America, Japan, America, Indonesia, Argentina, France, Japan, America, Australia, America, Indonesia, Japan, America, Japan, Russia, America, France, Japan, France, America, France, Japan, France, Turkey, Mexico, France, Japan, France, Japan, America, France, Japan, America, Japan, Japan, Indonesia, America, Philippines, Japan, France, Australia, France, Japan, Germany, France, America, Germany, France, Turkey, Philippines, America, Germany, Turkey, Israel, Germany, Philippines, Israel, Germany, America, Philippines, America, Germany, Philippines, Canada, Germany, Philippines, Germany, America, Germany, Germany, Canada, Indonesia, Germany, Mexico, America, Canada, America, Germany, Mexico, Ukraine, Canada, Germany, Australia, Russia, America, Germany, Germany, America, Ukraine, America, Germany, Indonesia, Japan, Australia, Germany, Indonesia, Canada, America, Germany, America, Spain, America, Germany, America, India, Australia, America, America, Germany, America, Germany, Israel, America, Palestine, Germany, America, America, Argentina, Germany, Germany, Palestine, Germany, Germany, Turkey, South America, Germany, Germany, Turkey, Indonesia, America, Germany, America, Germany, Germany, America, Vietnam, America, Germany, Unite America, America, Germany, Israel, Germany, America, Palestine, Germany, America, Germany, America, America, Philippines, Germany, France, America, 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 Palestine, Russia, Russia, Germany, Germany, America, Germany, America, Russia, Philippines, Russia, America, America, Russia, America, America, Russia, Germany, America, Germany, Germany, United Kingdom, Germany, America, America, Germany, 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 America, France, America, Germany, Turkey, Mexico, America, America, Turkey, Germany, Germany, Australia, Germany, Germany, Russia, Russia, Vietnam, Germany, Brazil, Spain, Germany, Russia, Germany, Canada, Brazil, Spain, Germany, Germany, Spain, Germany, Russia, Germany, Spain, Russia, Germany, Brazil, Germany, 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 Russia, Brazil, Russia, Germany, Spain, Russia, Germany, Germany, Mexico, Russia, Russia, Spain, Germany, Germany, Israel, Germany, Mexico, Brazil, Russia, Turkey, Mexico, Germany, Germany, Palestine, Brazil, Brazil, France, Turkey, Canada, Japan, Japan, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Germany, Germany, Philippines, Japan, Israel, Brazil, Japan, United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, 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 United Kingdom, United Kingdom, Germany, United Kingdom, France, United Kingdom, Mexico, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, India, Japan, Mexico, United Kingdom, Mexico, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, Mexico, United Kingdom, Brazil, Germany, Japan, United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, 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 Australia, Japan, Turkey, Australia, 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 Turkey, Mexico, Australia, Japan, Germany, United Kingdom, America, Japan, Japan, Indonesia, Mexico, America, Indonesia, Indonesia, Australia, Japan, Indonesia, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, Germany, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, Mexico, Japan, Israel, Australia, United Kingdom, Argentina, United Kingdom, India, Germany, Germany, Spain, Australia, Germany, Brazil, Spain, Mexico, India, Indonesia, Japan, United Kingdom, Philippines, South, Australia, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, Germany, United, Australia, Japan, Germany, United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, India, United Kingdom, Germany, United Kingdom, Germany, Philippines, Japan, Germany, Philippines, Japan, Germany, America, Germany, Mexico, Japan, Japan, United Kingdom, United Mexico, Philippines, Japan, America, United Kingdom, Japan, Philippines, Germany, United Kingdom, Japan, Argentina, America, United Kingdom, Mexico, Brazil, Germany, America, Germany, Japan, United Kingdom, Philippines, Japan, Germany, Mexico, Philippines, United Kingdom, Japan, Australia, Mexico, Philippines, Germany, America, Canada, Philippines, America, Japan, Spain, United Kingdom, Philippines, Japan, India, Philippines, America, France, Indonesia, Philippines, United Kingdom, Japan, America, United Kingdom, Philippines, America, United Kingdom, America, Japan, America, United Kingdom, Turkey, United Kingdom, Germany, Philippines, United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Canada, Japan, Philippines, United Kingdom, India, Japan, United Kingdom, South Korea, Japan, America, Australia, Japan, United Kingdom, Germany, Mexico, America, Indonesia, America, Japan, India, America, India, United America, India, Ukraine, India, America, Japan, India, America, United Kingdom, India, America, Germany, America, India, Philippines, America, India, America, United Kingdom, India, France, United Kingdom, America, India, United Kingdom, India, Canada, United Kingdom, India, America, United Kingdom, Indonesia, Spain, United Kingdom, America, Indonesia, Japan, America, Indonesia, Mexico, America, Philippines, South Korea, Russia, Japan, Philippines, Indonesia, United Kingdom, America, India, Mexico, America, Russia, India, United America, India, Philippines, India, America, India, America, India, America, India, Japan, India, America, Russia, India, Philippines, America, Japan, Russia, America, Russia, United Kingdom, Russia, America, Turkey, Spain, United Kingdom, Russia, America, Russia, South Russia, Indonesia, South Korea, India, South Korea, Russia, Indonesia, Russia, South Korea, America, India, Mexico, India, Spain, India, Mexico, India, Japan, India, America, Mexico, Japan, India, America, India, America, Mexico, Japan, India, Japan, 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 India, Germany, America, Japan, Spain, India, Japan, America, Japan, India, Vietnam, America, South Korea, Spain, America, Australia, South Korea, Spain, Vietnam, America, Japan, America, South, America, Japan, Spain, India, Japan, America, India, Mexico, South Korea, America, 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 Japan, America, Spain, Spain, Japan, America, 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 India, Mexico, Japan, Japan, India, Japan, Japan, India, America, Brazil, Japan, India, Turkey, Spain, India, America, America, Philippines, India, America, America, Brazil, America, Japan, Japan, India, Japan, Japan, America, America, Spain, America, India, Spain, Japan, America, India, India, America, Spain, America, Brazil, America, America, Australia, India, Spain, America, Japan, Philippines, America, Spain, India, America, Philippines, America, America, India, America, 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 South Korea, South Korea, India, Turkey, Spain, South Korea, Spain, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, France, South Korea, Australia, Indonesia, Spain, France, Australia, America, Australia, Australia, Argentina, Russia, Australia, South Korea, Australia, Brazil, Australia, Spain, America, Australia, Vietnam, Australia, Australia, Japan, Brazil, Australia, Spain, Russia, Australia, Brazil, India, Mexico, Brazil, Spain, Australia, India, Japan, Mexico, India, Japan, Japan, Spain, India, Indonesia, Russia, Brazil, India, Australia, Brazil, Palestine, America, Spain, South Japan, India, Mexico, Brazil, Ukraine, Australia, America, Spain, India, South Korea, America, India, Spain, Japan, Australia, America, Brazil, Russia, Brazil, America, Brazil, Australia, France, Spain, America, Brazil, Spain, Germany, Germany, Mexico, Japan, 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 Brazil, Spain, Mexico, Australia, Spain, Mexico, Russia, Australia, Spain, Brazil, France, Spain, India, Japan, 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 Brazil, America, America, Spain, United Kingdom, Japan, Spain, Mexico, America, Spain, Australia, Canada, Spain, Australia, America, Mexico, Mexico, Brazil, Germany, Spain, United Kingdom, Brazil, Spain, Japan, America, Brazil, Mexico, Germany, Japan, America, Mexico, Australia, America, Mexico, United Kingdom, Indonesia, Mexico, Canada, Brazil, Indonesia, Australia, Germany, India, United Kingdom, Australia, Mexico, Germany, Turkey, Argentina, Mexico, Australia, Mexico, Germany, Australia, Mexico, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, Australia, Mexico, Spain, Indonesia, Mexico, Spain, Mexico, Brazil, Mexico, Brazil, America, Brazil, America, India, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Spain, Argentina, United Kingdom, Australia, Mexico, Brazil, Mexico, Brazil, Australia, India, France, Australia, Australia, Brazil, United Kingdom, Indonesia, Australia, America, Australia, Argentina, Brazil, Germany, Australia, Brazil, United Kingdom, Australia, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Argentina, Philippines, United Kingdom, Germany, Israel, Argentina, Brazil, Germany, Australia, Brazil, Germany, Australia, Germany, Australia, Germany, Germany, Japan, Australia, Palestine, Indonesia, Germany, Australia, Brazil, Australia, Japan, Canada, America, Brazil, Germany, Spain, United Kingdom, Spain, Germany, Australia, Spain, Germany, Germany, Argentina, Japan, United Kingdom, Japan, United Kingdom, America, Turkey, America, Japan, Germany, Israel, South Korea, Japan, Germany, Japan, Mexico, Canada, America, United Kingdom, America, Japan, South Korea, Germany, Japan, Mexico, Canada, Argentina, Germany, Mexico, Germany, Philippines, Japan, Mexico, Canada, South Korea, Mexico, America, Germany, Japan, Canada, Germany, Canada, Philippines, Mexico, Japan, Germany, Russia, Argentina, America, Germany, Germany, Canada, United Germany, America, Canada, Mexico, America, Germany, Japan, Germany, Argentina, America, Germany, Indonesia, Germany, Brazil, Germany, Canada, Japan, Argentina, Brazil, Argentina, Germany, Brazil, Canada, Germany, Indonesia, Argentina, Brazil, America, Australia, Brazil, South Korea, America, Germany, Russia, South Korea, Canada, Germany, Brazil, South Korea, America, Argentina, America, Brazil, Germany, America, Turkey, Argentina, America, Brazil, Canada, Germany, Germany, Japan, Brazil, South Brazil, Turkey, Japan, America, Japan, America, Turkey, South Japan, Brazil, Japan, Japan, Brazil, America, Japan, Israel, Canada, Russia, Brazil, America, Brazil, America, South Korea, America, Japan, Brazil, America, Japan, Brazil, South, Mexico, Turkey, Canada, Germany, South, Canada, Brazil, America, Vietnam, America, South, Vietnam, Turkey, Turkey, Vietnam, Turkey, Turkey, South Korea, South Korea, Russia, Turkey, Germany, Turkey, Philippines, Germany, Turkey, Brazil, India, Turkey, America, Germany, Russia, America, Turkey, America, Turkey, Japan, America, Turkey, America, Russia, Turkey, America, Turkey, Germany, Turkey, Turkey, Brazil, Germany, Turkey, Turkey, Germany, Turkey, Brazil, Turkey, Turkey, South Korea, Turkey, Turkey, Philippines, South Korea, Germany, Turkey, South Korea, South Korea, America, Brazil, Russia, South Korea, Brazil, Turkey, Germany, South Korea, Russia, Brazil, Brazil, South Turkey, Australia, Brazil, Turkey, Canada, America, Russia, Philippines, America, South Korea, Russia, America, Ukraine, Brazil, Germany, America, South Australia, America, Turkey, Russia, Israel, Turkey, Germany, Brazil, America, Turkey, Brazil, Russia, Turkey, America, America, Germany, Philippines, Turkey, America, Germany, Turkey, Japan, Turkey, Australia, Turkey, Russia, Israel, Germany, Turkey, South Turkey, Japan, South Korea, America, United Kingdom, South Korea, America, Russia, South Korea, America, Germany, Japan, South Korea, United Kingdom, Germany, South Korea, Australia, Australia, Canada, France, United Kingdom, Israel, Russia, Brazil, South Korea, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Australia, America, Russia, America, Japan, Canada, Australia, France, Germany, Ukraine, France, Germany, Australia, Russia, Australia, Germany, Canada, South Korea, Brazil, Russia, South Canada, Brazil, Germany, Brazil, Germany, Australia, South Indonesia, Australia, Germany, Philippines, Russia, India, Germany, Canada, Russia, South Germany, Philippines, Germany, Australia, Ukraine, Japan, South Canada, Russia, America, South Korea, Japan, Russia, Japan, South Korea, America, United Kingdom, Australia, France, Japan, Germany, France, South, Australia, France, Germany, South Korea, France, Russia, India, France, Palestine, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, Russia, Australia, France, Germany, France, South Korea, Palestine, France, Palestine, Indonesia, France, Russia, Australia, France, Japan, Russia, France, Germany, Australia, France, United Kingdom, Germany, France, Palestine, Japan, France, Philippines, France, India, Philippines, France, Australia, Japan, Germany, France, Philippines, Japan, France, Canada, Philippines, Australia, Israel, Turkey, Palestine, Turkey, Australia, Turkey, Germany, Australia, Canada, Brazil, Spain, Germany, France, Japan, France, Germany, Brazil, America, Turkey, Germany, France, Brazil, United Kingdom, Germany, Brazil, Philippines, Ukraine, Japan, Brazil, America, Palestine, France, Turkey, South Korea, France, Canada, America, Ukraine, South Korea, America, Japan, America, France, South Korea, Germany, Russia, France, Turkey, France, Ukraine, Turkey, Germany, Turkey, Israel, Germany, Japan, Japan, Germany, Russia, Germany, France, South Korea, United Kingdom, Turkey, Germany, Turkey, Germany, France, Turkey, United Kingdom, Turkey, Germany, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Turkey, Germany, Russia, India, Germany, Germany, South Korea, Japan, India, Japan, France, Germany, South Korea, Germany, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Turkey, France, South Korea, France, Philippines, South Korea, Germany, South Korea, Philippines, United Kingdom, Philippines, South Korea, Germany, United Kingdom, South Philippines, United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, France, United Kingdom, South Korea, Germany, Japan, Japan, South Korea, Japan, United Kingdom, South Korea, United Kingdom, Russia, America, Germany, South Korea, Russia, Mexico, Germany, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, Germany, Mexico, Germany, Indonesia, Japan, India, Argentina, India, Germany, India, South Korea, India, South Korea, Germany, South Korea, Germany, United Mexico, Germany, Japan, India, Palestine, United India, Japan, Mexico, Japan, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, Turkey, United Kingdom, Indonesia, Indonesia, Japan, India, United Kingdom, Germany, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, Indonesia, Germany, United Kingdom, Indonesia, Indonesia, United Kingdom, Indonesia, Indonesia, Germany, Indonesia, Germany, Indonesia, Germany, Indonesia, United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, Germany, Indonesia, 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 Germany, Indonesia, United Kingdom, Russia, Indonesia, Indonesia, Germany, Germany, Indonesia, Indonesia, Palestine, Indonesia, 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 Germany, Indonesia, Israel, Germany, South Korea, South Korea, Germany, Indonesia, Germany, Vietnam, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, Russia, America, Germany, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, United Kingdom, South Korea, United Kingdom, America, Germany, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, South Korea, America, Japan, America, Japan, Japan, Germany, Mexico, America, America, Argentina, Indonesia, America, America, India, America, Vietnam, United Kingdom, Argentina, Turkey, United Kingdom, Germany, United Kingdom, Turkey, South Korea, Turkey, United Kingdom, Germany, Palestine, Germany, Argentina, America, United Kingdom, Japan, Argentina, United Kingdom, Argentina, Indonesia, United Kingdom, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Japan, 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 Indonesia, Germany, Japan, Germany, Argentina, Germany, South Argentina, South Korea, Germany, South Korea, Germany, Indonesia, Japan, Russia, South Korea, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Germany, Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Germany, Ukraine, Japan, South Indonesia, South Korea, Philippines, Germany, South Korea, Indonesia, Germany, South Korea, Indonesia, Japan, Mexico, Japan, Indonesia, Spain, Indonesia, South Korea, Turkey, Russia, Mexico, Spain, South Korea, Canada, Russia, Philippines, South Korea, South Russia, South Korea, Russia, South Korea, Turkey, South Korea, Palestine, South Korea, Australia, Russia, South Korea, Argentina, South Korea, Russia, South Korea, Russia, India, Turkey, America, Vietnam, America, Japan, Argentina, Australia, Germany, Indonesia, Palestine, Israel, India, South Japan, South Korea, Japan, South Germany, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Germany, Philippines, South Germany, Japan, Philippines, Japan, France, South Korea, America, Mexico, America, Germany, Japan, Germany, America, Japan, America, Japan, Israel, America, Philippines, United Kingdom, Japan, Indonesia, South Korea, Germany, Japan, South Germany, Turkey, Germany, Japan, Mexico, Japan, 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 Russia, Canada, 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 Japan, Canada, Japan, America, Canada, 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 America, Japan, India, Japan, America, Japan, Spain, South Korea, America, South Korea, America, Japan, Russia, Australia, Japan, Japan, Canada, 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 Japan, Canada, Turkey, America, Russia, America, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Israel, Japan, America, Japan, India, Germany, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, Russia, Japan, Turkey, South Korea, Russia, South Korea, Russia, Spain, Japan, Russia, Japan, Vietnam, Japan, Japan, South India, India, Philippines, Argentina, South Korea, Japan, United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, India, Germany, India, South Korea, India, Canada, India, Japan, Japan, India, Japan, South Korea, India, Japan, South Germany, Japan, Germany, South Korea, Germany, Indonesia, Germany, Japan, Japan, India, South Korea, Germany, India, Japan, Germany, South Korea, Japan, India, Germany, Japan, India, Germany, Japan, Russia, South Korea, Indonesia, United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, America, Spain, Indonesia, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Indonesia, 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 Philippines, Mexico, Indonesia, Indonesia, Philippines, Indonesia, Palestine, Russia, South Korea, Russia, Israel, Indonesia, 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 South Korea, South Korea, Russia, Indonesia, Indonesia, Japan, Indonesia, 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 Ukraine, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, Brazil, South Korea, Russia, Russia, Canada, Indonesia, 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 Brazil, Indonesia, Brazil, Indonesia, 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 South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Brazil, South Korea, France, France, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Australia, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, Indonesia, South Korea, Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, Vietnam, India, South Korea, Ukraine, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, Philippines, Indonesia, India, Russia, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Israel, South India, South Indonesia, Russia, South Korea, India, Indonesia, South Korea, India, South Korea, South Korea, India, South Korea, India, Indonesia, 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 India, Indonesia, South Japan, Indonesia, Indonesia, South Korea, India, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, India, South Korea, India, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, Indonesia, India, Indonesia, South Korea, Argentina, South Korea, Indonesia, Indonesia, Philippines, Japan, Indonesia, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Canada, Indonesia, South Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, 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 South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, India, Argentina, Indonesia, Indonesia, Turkey, Indonesia, India, Indonesia, South India, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Germany, India, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, India, Indonesia, India, Indonesia, Japan, India, Japan, Turkey, South Japan, South Korea, Japan, Mexico, India, South Korea, Japan, India, Japan, India, Indonesia, 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 South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, India, South Korea, South Korea, Japan, America, Japan, Spain, Indonesia, Spain, Japan, Indonesia, South Korea, Russia, Japan, South Indonesia, Ukraine, Indonesia, Canada, South Korea, Indonesia, Germany, South Korea, Germany, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, India, South Korea, Indonesia, India, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Philippines, South Korea, Japan, India, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, India, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, India, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, India, Brazil, South Korea, Indonesia, India, South Korea, India, Germany, South Korea, Germany, India, Germany, India, Germany, Spain, Canada, Germany, France, India, Germany, South Korea, India, Germany, France, Indonesia, Germany, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, Germany, Indonesia, Germany, Indonesia, Spain, Germany, Indonesia, South Korea, South India, Indonesia, France, Germany, Argentina, South Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, South Spain, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Australia, Russia, United Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, South Korea, Indonesia, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Turkey, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, South Korea, Turkey, South Korea, Indonesia, America, Indonesia, South Korea, Russia, South Korea, Indonesia, Turkey, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, Brazil, Indonesia, Philippines, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, Japan, Argentina, Indonesia, South Indonesia, Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, Canada, Philippines, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, Palestine, Vietnam, France, Turkey, France, Vietnam, France, America, South Korea, Canada, South Korea, Vietnam, Germany, South Korea, America, Vietnam, Spain, Vietnam, South Korea, Turkey, Vietnam, Vietnam, Argentina, Vietnam, Indonesia, Vietnam, Germany, Indonesia, Vietnam, Australia, America, Indonesia, Mexico, Indonesia, Japan, America, America, India, America, South America, Vietnam, America, Indonesia, America, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, America, South Indonesia, Indonesia, America, Brazil, America, South Korea, America, South Korea, Indonesia, South Canada, South Korea, America, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, America, South America, America, South Korea, Spain, America, Australia, America, Indonesia, Vietnam, America, Japan, South America, South Vietnam, France, Australia, South Korea, Australia, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, Australia, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, South Korea, Australia, Vietnam, Argentina, Vietnam, Vietnam, Israel, Vietnam, France, Vietnam, South Korea, America, Russia, South Korea, Vietnam, 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 Turkey, Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, South Korea, Ukraine, Vietnam, 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 South Korea, France, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, Vietnam, Spain, Vietnam, Russia, 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 Vietnam, Vietnam, Japan, Vietnam, America, Russia, Indonesia, Russia, Indonesia, Russia, South Korea, Vietnam, 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 South Korea, Philippines, Russia, Russia, America, America, Mexico, Russia, Russia, America, Russia, America, America, Russia, Russia, Vietnam, Russia, 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 Philippines, Russia, Russia, Canada, South Korea, France, Vietnam, South Russia, South Korea, Russia, United Russia, Canada, South Russia, Russia, Vietnam, Russia, Canada, America, Russia, America, Russia, Russia, Canada, Russia, Germany, South Korea, Vietnam, Vietnam, Canada, Argentina, Russia, South Korea, Russia, Russia, Vietnam, Russia, Canada, Philippines, Russia, Indonesia, Russia, Philippines, South Korea, Russia, Japan, Germany, Russia, South Korea, Russia, South Korea, South America, Canada, South America, Russia, America, South Korea, Indonesia, Russia, Canada, South Korea, Canada, Russia, South Korea, Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, Canada, America, Russia, Canada, Indonesia, Argentina, South Canada, South Korea, America, Canada, America, Russia, South Canada, Russia, Turkey, Canada, South Korea, Germany, Canada, Argentina, South Korea, Canada, Argentina, South Korea, Russia, South Germany, South Korea, Canada, South Korea, Australia, South Korea, Argentina, Russia, South Korea, America, Vietnam, South Russia, Palestine, Australia, South America, Russia, Turkey, Russia, South Korea, Russia, America, South Korea, Australia, Russia, Japan, South Korea, Russia, Vietnam, Australia, Russia, Australia, Spain, Russia, India, Australia, Russia, America, Russia, Australia, South Korea, Australia, United Kingdom, America, Australia, Russia, Japan, America, Russia, Japan, America, Japan, America, Germany, America, Russia, Japan, Indonesia, South Korea, Russia, United Kingdom, Japan, America, Mexico, Philippines, Russia, Japan, Russia, Russia, Japan, United Russia, America, Japan, Russia, Japan, Japan, Vietnam, Japan, Russia, Germany, Brazil, Japan, Germany, Japan, Russia, Japan, France, South Korea, Germany, Israel, Russia, Germany, Japan, Germany, America, Russia, Germany, America, Germany, Japan, Japan, Germany, Russia, Japan, Germany, Japan, Russia, Russia, America, Germany, Brazil, Japan, Germany, Germany, Israel, America, Germany, America, Germany, Germany, Japan, Germany, United Kingdom, Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam, Japan, Germany, Russia, Japan, America, Japan, Germany, America, Japan, America, Germany, Russia, America, Germany, America, Germany, Australia, Japan, Germany, Mexico, Philippines, Canada, Japan, Germany, Vietnam, Japan, Germany, Germany, Australia, Japan, Indonesia, South America, United, Vietnam, Germany, Russia, Japan, Japan, Argentina, Japan, Germany, India, Japan, Germany, Japan, Japan, Indonesia, South Germany, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, Spain, Germany, Indonesia, Germany, Indonesia, Vietnam, Japan, Russia, Germany, Japan, Germany, Russia, Vietnam, Germany, Japan, Japan, Vietnam, Germany, Japan, Germany, Russia, America, Japan, America, Vietnam, America, South Korea, Japan, America, Indonesia, Japan, Argentina, South Korea, Japan, America, Indonesia, America, Japan, South Korea, America, Japan, Philippines, Japan, Germany, India, Japan, Vietnam, Japan, Philippines, Japan, Japan, South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Israel, Japan, Vietnam, South America, Australia, South Korea, Japan, France, Japan, Vietnam, Japan, 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 Ukraine, South Japan, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, France, South Japan, Japan, South Korea, Japan, Philippines, United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, Philippines, Japan, Japan, Philippines, Japan, 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 Vietnam, Japan, Australia, Philippines, Vietnam, Australia, South Korea, Spain, Vietnam, Japan, Japan, South India, South Korea, Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Ukraine, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Germany, Japan, Brazil, Israel, Vietnam, Brazil, Japan, Brazil, South Korea, Brazil, South Korea, Brazil, Japan, 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 Vietnam, South Korea, Brazil, 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 South Korea, Japan, Japan, France, Japan, Vietnam, Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, France, Japan, Japan, Australia, Vietnam, Japan, South France, France, Vietnam, South Korea, France, Japan, South Japan, France, France, Vietnam, Philippines, South Korea, Australia, Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Israel, South Korea, Brazil, Japan, Australia, Japan, Japan, Brazil, South Japan, Brazil, Japan, South Japan, 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 South Argentina, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Argentina, Philippines, Brazil, Philippines, Australia, Japan, France, Indonesia, Brazil, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, France, Japan, Brazil, Palestine, France, Brazil, Japan. Palette, France, Japan. Vietnam, Japan, Japan. France, Philippines, Vietnam, Japan. Philippines, Vietnam, Japan, Japan. Palette, Vietnam, Japan, Japan. France, Vietnam, Canada, France, Vietnam, Vietnam, France, Japan, France. Brazil, France, France. Japan, France, France. Russia, France, France. America, Japan, France, Mexico, France, France. Australia, France, Argentina, France, France. America, 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 Japan, Unite France, France, Japan, France, Japan, Canada, Japan, Japan, France, Israel, India, France, Unite Japan, Japan, France, Indonesia, France, 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 Germany, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, Japan, United Kingdom, Indonesia, 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 in France, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, in United Kingdom, France, Japan, Indonesia, Canada, Japan, Indonesia, United Kingdom, Japan, United Kingdom, Japan, Japan, in Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Japan, Canada, Japan, Japan, India, Canada, United Kingdom, Japan, Indonesia, United Kingdom, South Korea, Japan, South, United Kingdom, South, Japan, 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 India, South Korea, Argentina, Japan, United Kingdom, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Japan, India, United Kingdom, Japan, Turkey, United Kingdom, South, United Kingdom, South, Indonesia, Spain, South, Turkey, South Korea, Japan, Philippines, Turkey, Japan, Turkey, Canada, Indonesia, South, United, Canada, United, India, Philippines, India, United, South Korea, India, United, South, Canada, Philippines, South, Germany, South Korea, Spain, South Korea, South Turkey, South Turkey, Germany, Turkey, South Korea, Turkey, United Kingdom, India, United, South, India, South Korea, Israel, South India, South, United Kingdom, Canada, India, United Kingdom, South, Turkey, India, United Kingdom, Indonesia, South Turkey, Philippines, India, Turkey, Turkey, South Korea, Turkey, Philippines, South, Indonesia, India, India, South Korea, South Korea, United Kingdom, South Korea, India, Turkey, India, South Korea, Turkey, South Korea, India, Turkey, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, Philippines, India, India, Russia, Indonesia, India, South Argentina, Philippines, Turkey, India, Australia, Philippines, India, Indonesia, India, Spain, South Korea, India, South Korea, South Korea, Philippines, Turkey, India, Turkey, South Korea, India, Turkey, India, South Korea, South Korea, India, Japan, Japan, South India, Japan, India, South Spain, India, South Japan, India, South France, India, India, South Korea, Indonesia, Germany, India, 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 South Korea, Japan, India, South Korea, Spain, India, India, Indonesia, Mexico, India, Japan, Japan, India, Japan, South India, India, America, Turkey, America, India, Japan, India, America, India, India, Indonesia, Mexico, India, India, Japan, India, Indonesia, India, 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 South Korea, India, South India, 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 South Korea, India, 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 Canada, India, India, Turkey, India, Turkey, South Korea, India, Indonesia, Turkey, Germany, India, 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 Turkey, Brazil, India, Turkey, India, India, Australia, India, India, South Korea, United Kingdom, Turkey, India, South Korea, India, Canada, India, Indonesia, India, India, America, Turkey, India, India, Turkey, India, India, South Korea, South Korea, India, South America, India, India, America, India, South India, Turkey, India, South India, South Korea, America, India, 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 South Korea, Turkey, Mexico, Argentina, India, Mexico, India, India, France, India, South Korea, India, Indonesia, India, 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 Turkey, India, India, Japan, India, Japan, India, Philippines, South India, Canada, India, South Korea, India, Philippines, Japan, Japan, Turkey, India, Turkey, South India, Japan, India, Turkey, India, South Japan, Japan, South Korea, India, South Korea, Indonesia, Japan, India, Japan, Japan, India, 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 South Korea, Australia, Japan, South Japan, Japan, Spain, India, Vietnam, America, Indonesia, India, Japan, Indonesia, South Korea, Philippines, South Korea, Indonesia, Philippines, Japan, India, Japan, America, South Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, America, Philippines, Vietnam, South India, America, Vietnam, America, South Korea, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Russia, Vietnam, South Korea, Spain, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Indonesia, South Korea, France, South Korea, Vietnam, Japan, Israel, Japan, Brazil, South Korea, India, South Korea, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Japan, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, Israel, South Korea, South America, Turkey, Vietnam, Russia, South Korea, Vietnam, Russia, Vietnam, South Korea, Germany, South Korea, South Korea, Russia, South Korea, South America, Mexico, Australia, South Korea, Mexico, Israel, South Korea, Vietnam, Australia, Australia, Brazil, Australia, Australia, America, Argentina, South Korea, Turkey, South Korea, South Korea, Russia, South Korea, South Korea, Turkey, South Korea, Australia, Japan, Australia, South Turkey, South Korea, Australia, 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 South Korea, Japan, 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 United Kingdom, India, Japan, 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 United Kingdom, Japan, 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 Germany, Japan, Turkey, Japan, India, South Korea, Japan, Turkey, Japan, Turkey, South Korea, South Korea, Russia, South Korea, Turkey, 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 India, Japan, Turkey, 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 South Turkey, Turkey, Ukraine, Turkey, Turkey, Japan, Russia, Turkey, South Korea, Turkey, Japan, Turkey, 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 Japan, South Korea, Argentina, Turkey, Japan, Japan, America, South Turkey, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Turkey, 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 Japan, Japan, Turkey, Japan, Palestine, South Korea, Turkey, United Kingdom, South Korea, Turkey, Japan, Turkey, Japan, Japan, Turkey, Turkey, Spain, Turkey, Japan, Turkey, Japan, Japan, Russia, Japan, Japan, Argentina, Turkey, Japan, South Korea, Philippines, South Korea, America, Japan, Japan, India, Japan, Philippines, Spain, Japan, Japan, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Mexico, South Korea, Philippines, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, South Japan, India, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Philippines, South Korea, India, Russia, Philippines, South Korea, Vietnam, Philippines, Brazil, Philippines, Australia, India, Philippines, South Korea, India, Canada, Philippines, Indonesia, Philippines, South Korea, Philippines, South Korea, Mexico, Philippines, South Korea, Philippines, Canada, South India, America, United Kingdom, Philippines, South Korea, Philippines, South Korea, Australia, South France, Philippines, Argentina, Canada, Vietnam, Brazil, South Korea, Russia, South Korea, Philippines, Argentina, Israel, Palestine, South Korea, Spain, South Korea, Argentina, France, South Korea, Australia, Philippines, Germany, Indonesia, Vietnam, Germany, Russia, Philippines, Brazil, Germany, Canada, Germany, Philippines, Germany, Ukraine, Indonesia, Indonesia, Germany, South Korea, Turkey, Indonesia, Philippines, South Korea, Indonesia, Germany, Philippines, Indonesia, Germany, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Philippines, South Korea, Russia, Indonesia, Russia, Philippines, Australia, Indonesia, Russia, Indonesia, Germany, Indonesia, Indonesia, Russia, Philippines, South Korea, Russia, Canada, Russia, Russia, Philippines, Russia, Indonesia, Russia, Indonesia, Russia, India, Russia, Indonesia, Indonesia, South Korea, India, Philippines, South Korea, Russia, Russia, South Korea, Russia, Philippines, Indonesia, South Philippines, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, Israel, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Philippines, Russia, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, Australia, South Korea, Philippines, South Korea, Japan, Canada, South Korea, Indonesia, Turkey, Philippines, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, Turkey, Philippines, Japan, Philippines, South Korea, America, Indonesia, Mexico, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Japan, Philippines, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, United Kingdom, France, South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Philippines, South Korea, Germany, South Korea, France, Philippines, South Korea, Ukraine, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Mexico, South Korea, Indonesia, South Japan, South Indonesia, South Korea, France, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, Philippines, South Korea, Indonesia, Israel, Philippines, Indonesia, France, Indonesia, South Korea, Ukraine, South Korea, Philippines, Spain, Japan, South Korea, South Japan, Indonesia, Philippines, Philippines, Indonesia, South Korea, Ukraine, Indonesia, France, South Korea, Ukraine, Israel, America, Indonesia, America, South Korea, America, Mexico, Indonesia, Australia, Japan, Indonesia, Israel, South Korea, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, United Kingdom, Indonesia, Palestine, Indonesia, Japan, India, Indonesia, South Korea, America, Indonesia, Canada, Indonesia, Japan, Indonesia, South Korea, Ukraine, Indonesia, Japan, Spain, America, South Korea, Indonesia, Brazil, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Indonesia, United Kingdom, United Kingdom, Japan, United Kingdom, America, Japan, Indonesia, America, Indonesia, South Korea, India, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Russia, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, South Indonesia, Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, France, South Korea, Indonesia, Germany, Mexico, Philippines, South Korea, Indonesia, Mexico, Philippines, Mexico, Mexico, Germany, Philippines, Japan, Mexico, United Kingdom, Mexico, South Korea, South Korea, Brazil, Mexico, Philippines, South Australia, Philippines, South Korea, South Korea, Canada, Mexico, South Korea, Brazil, Mexico, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Mexico, South Korea, Mexico, Palestine, America, Philippines, Mexico, Germany, Philippines, Mexico, Mexico, Philippines, Germany, South Korea, America, Philippines, Germany, Philippines, Russia, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Germany, Philippines, America, Vietnam, Israel, Palestine, Philippines, Brazil, Australia, United Kingdom, Philippines, South Korea, Brazil, Germany, Philippines, Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, South Korea, South Korea, Brazil, India, Germany, South Korea, Brazil, South Korea, Ukraine, Brazil, South Korea, Brazil, Philippines, Australia, Brazil, South Korea, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, Brazil, Russia, Philippines, South Korea, Brazil, Brazil, South Spain, South Korea, South Brazil, Philippines, India, Russia, Indonesia, Russia, Philippines, 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 Indonesia, Philippines, 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 India, Ukraine, Philippines, Philippines, South Korea, Philippines, Philippines, Brazil, South Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, America, Australia, Philippines, Philippines, Australia, Philippines, Indonesia, Spain, Indonesia, Indonesia, Philippines, France, Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, Turkey, Indonesia, Russia, Philippines, Philippines, Germany, Philippines, Canada, Japan, Philippines, Germany, Argentina, Mexico, Philippines, Philippines, Israel, Philippines, Israel, Spain, Israel, Israel, Germany, Israel, Indonesia, Israel, Australia, Indonesia, Indonesia, America, Indonesia, Indonesia, South Philippines, Palestine, Palestine, South Korea, Philippines, Germany, Brazil, Philippines, America, Brazil, Canada, South Korea, Turkey, Mexico, Brazil, Philippines, Turkey, Philippines, India, Israel, Russia, South Korea, America, Mexico, America, South Russia, America, Philippines, South Brazil, Japan, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, South Korea, Indonesia, South Indonesia, Philippines, South Korea, Philippines, Brazil, Philippines, Brazil, Indonesia, Brazil, Israel, Brazil, America, Japan, South Philippines, Mexico, Turkey, Indonesia, Philippines, Spain, Indonesia, Brazil, America, Philippines, Brazil, Indonesia, France, Indonesia, Russia, Indonesia, Brazil, Australia, Brazil, South Korea, Indonesia, Brazil, Spain, Australia, Brazil, Indonesia, South Korea, Australia, Australia, Japan, South Spain, Indonesia, Brazil, Palestine, Vietnam, Israel, Ukraine, Australia, India, Indonesia, Japan, Indonesia, Israel, Indonesia, Russia, Vietnam, Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, Russia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, Vietnam, Argentina, Indonesia, Japan, Mexico, Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam, Mexico, Japan, France, Israel, Mexico, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Israel, Japan, Mexico, Argentina, Israel, Japan, Ukraine, Israel, Spain, Mexico, Indonesia, Russia, Japan, Indonesia, South Japan, Russia, Japan, Israel, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Israel, Indonesia, Mexico, Japan, Mexico, Japan, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, Indonesia, South Korea, America, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, Israel, Japan, Canada, Israel, Japan, Philippines, Japan, Mexico, Israel, America, Japan, 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 Mexico, America, Brazil, Indonesia, Israel, Indonesia, Japan, Japan, Indonesia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Israel, Japan, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, Indonesia, Indonesia, Mexico, India, Indonesia, Indonesia, Japan, Japan, Spain, Israel, South Korea, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, South Philippines, America, South Korea, South Japan, Japan, America, Mexico, Israel, Indonesia, South Japan, America, South Korea, Japan, South America, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Japan, America, Japan, Israel, America, Vietnam, Japan, Japan, America, Japan, 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 America, Japan, Israel, Japan, Indonesia, Mexico, Japan, Israel, America, Japan, America, Japan, Israel, Japan, America, South Korea, Indonesia, Mexico, America, 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 Israel, Israel, Mexico, Indonesia, Israel, Indonesia, Mexico, Mexico, Japan, Spain, Japan, Japan, America, Indonesia, Philippines, Japan, America, Japan, Philippines, Japan, America, Turkey, America, Israel, America, Spain, America, Indonesia, America, Japan, America, Indonesia, Mexico, Philippines, Mexico, Japan, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, Philippines, Philippines, Japan, Mexico, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, America, Philippines, America, Japan, 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 Israel, Japan, Mexico, Japan, Philippines, Japan, South Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, South Japan, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Australia, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, Japan, Spain, Indonesia, Japan, Brazil, Japan, Japan, Indonesia, Brazil, Japan, South Korea, Japan, South France, Japan, 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 Brazil, Indonesia, Japan, Japan, Mexico, Japan, Spain, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, Japan, Japan, Spain, Japan, 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 Indonesia, Vietnam, South Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Indonesia, South Korea, South Japan, 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 South Indonesia, France, Spain, Spain, Israel, Japan, 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 Vietnam, Indonesia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Vietnam, South Japan, Japan, Vietnam, Japan, Japan, Ukraine, South Korea, South Japan, Indonesia, South Spain, Japan, Japan. South Korea. Spain. South Japan. India. Brazil. Vietnam. Spain. Spain. Japan. America. South Philippines. In Spain. Japan. South Korea. Japan. Spain. Vietnam. Spain. Indonesia. Philippines. In America. Vietnam. Japan. Russia. South Korea. South Korea. Philippines. Indonesia. South Spain. South Spain. Philippines. Japan. Spain. Japan. Japan. Philippines. Spain. South Korea. South Korea. Mexico. Spain. Japan. Philippines. America. Philippines. Spain. Philippines. South Russia. Japan. South Korea. Philippines. Japan. South Korea. Philippines. India. Philippines. Philippines. America. South Korea. South Korea. Russia. Japan. Philippines. Japan. South Korea. Russia. Japan. Ukraine. Japan. Vietnam. Japan. Philippines. Japan. Philippines. India. Japan. Brazil. Japan. Vietnam. Japan. Spain. Philippines. Brazil. Philippines. Japan. Spain. Turkey. Japan. South Korea. Philippines. South Korea. South Korea. Philippines. Spain. South Korea. Philippines. Turkey. Spain. Japan. Philippines. Japan. South Japan. South Korea. Ukraine. Philippines. Spain. South Korea. South Korea. Philippines. Spain. South Korea. South Korea. Turkey. South Korea. Spain. Philippines. South Korea. Spain. Indonesia. South Korea. Turkey. South Philippines. South Japan. South Philippines. South Korea. South Korea. Philippines. Turkey. South Korea. South Korea. Turkey. Philippines. United Kingdom. Japan. Turkey. South Korea. Germany. Japan. Turkey. South Korea. United Kingdom. South Korea. Spain. Philippines. Vietnam. United Kingdom. South Korea. Turkey. South Korea. South Korea. Turkey. South Korea. Turkey. South Korea. Turkey. South Korea. South Korea. South Korea. Turkey. Philippines. America. Turkey. South Korea. Indonesia. United Turkey. Spain. Turkey. South Korea. Philippines. Brazil. South Korea. Turkey. Philippines. Australia. South Korea. Philippines. Vietnam. Philippines. Philippines. America. United Kingdom. South Korea. Spain. South Korea. South Korea. South Indonesia. South Korea. Germany. Mexico. South Korea. South Korea. in South Korea, United Kingdom, India, America, South Korea, South Korea, France, United Kingdom, Australia, South Korea, Australia, France, America, Australia, France, South Philippines, Australia, South Korea, Ukraine, South Korea, Australia, Philippines, Australia, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Philippines, Palestine, Australia, Philippines, Philippines, India, India, South Korea, Mexico, Australia, South Australia, Philippines, America, 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 Philippines, America, America, Australia, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, India, Australia, Australia, America, Australia, America, America, Australia, India, Australia, Mexico, America, India, South Korea, Vietnam, America, Philippines, Mexico, Philippines, South Korea, Philippines, South Korea, South Spain, America, South India, South America, South Korea, South India, Japan, Spain, India, Japan, Philippines, South Korea, Philippines, Philippines, Indonesia, Indonesia, Turkey, Philippines, South Korea, Canada, South Korea, Canada, Russia, America, America, Turkey, South Korea, in Ukraine, India, America, Argentina, Japan, America, Ukraine, Philippines, South Korea, Argentina, Indonesia, Germany, India, America, Philippines, Germany, America, Philippines, Germany, America, America, South America, Palestine, Philippines, Japan, South Brazil, America, America, South Korea, America, South Korea, Japan, Philippines, America, Japan, Brazil, Japan, Israel, Mexico, America, France, Israel, France, South Korea, America, Israel, America, Russia, America, 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 Germany, America, South Korea, America, Indonesia, America, America, Turkey, Brazil, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, America, Indonesia, America, Brazil, Indonesia, South Korea, Turkey, South Korea, South Korea, India, America, South Korea, Indonesia, America, Vietnam, United Kingdom, Indonesia, Mexico, Vietnam, America, Indonesia, Australia, Vietnam, Germany, South Korea, India, Vietnam, South Korea, America, Vietnam, South Korea, America, Brazil, America, South, Philippines, Brazil, South, America, South Korea, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, South Korea, America, Japan, America, Vietnam, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Philippines, America, South Korea, Vietnam, Japan, Turkey, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, South Brazil, South, Mexico, Vietnam, South Korea, Indonesia, Russia, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, Ukraine, South, Vietnam, Brazil, Ukraine, Brazil, Indonesia, Brazil, Ukraine, India, Indonesia, Russia, Germany, United Kingdom, Indonesia, Palestine, Canada, Argentina, South Ukraine, Argentina, Canada, Mexico, Argentina, India, Indonesia, Brazil, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Canada, Germany, Argentina, Brazil, Indonesia, Argentina, Indonesia, India, America, Indonesia, South Korea, Palestine, Canada, India, America, Indonesia, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, Ukraine, South Korea, America, Russia, Ukraine, America, Russia, Palestine, America, Australia, Germany, Canada, Palestine, Ukraine, Brazil, Canada, South Germany, Brazil, Ukraine, America, Indonesia, South Korea, Brazil, Indonesia, Ukraine, America, Canada, Brazil, Germany, Australia, Germany, South Palestine, Philippines, Indonesia, Australia, Germany, Canada, Germany, Brazil, Germany, Indonesia, Germany, Vietnam, Germany, Canada, Brazil, Indonesia, Brazil, South Korea, Indonesia, South Brazil, Palestine, Brazil, Indonesia, South Korea, Germany, Indonesia, South Korea, Germany, Indonesia, Canada, Turkey, Canada, Israel, Japan, Germany, Indonesia, Canada, South Korea, Japan, Brazil, Canada, Indonesia, South Brazil, Israel, Indonesia, Canada, Germany, Germany, Canada, Canada, Indonesia, Israel, Canada, Germany, Indonesia, South Korea, Canada, Germany, South Korea, Indonesia, Canada, Germany, Canada, South, Japan, Indonesia, Palestine, Germany, Indonesia, South Korea, Canada, Palestine, South Brazil, South Korea, Palestine, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, South Palestine, South Korea, Palestine, Indonesia, South Korea, South Indonesia, South Korea, Indonesia, Indonesia, Palestine, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, Palestine, South Korea, Mexico, Indonesia, Palestine.